This narrative will make more sense if I give you a little background. In California, I attend a public university. The UC system includes it. My university is quite modest in comparison to others in the UC system, such as Santa Barbara, Berkeley, and UCLA. All of the incoming freshmen at one of the major universities go on a campus tour on tour day, as it is commonly known. In reality, though, it's really a pretext for the present student body to host wild all-day bashes. For instance, Cal Day is the name of Berkeley's while Deltopia is the name of Santa Barbara's. It is not uncommon for students from other campuses to travel to larger colleges for just one day. Even though my campus is approximately 2.5 hours away from Santa Barbara, never having been one to partake in such wild parties before, I suddenly realized a few months ago that I was entering my final year of high school and would never have another opportunity like that. They wanted me to accompany them to Deltopia in Santa Barbara, so I said fuck it and went along. On Friday afternoon, the day prior to the celebration, we made the journey down. Everything was crammed into the vehicle. Hunter was behind the wheel, and Damon, Benjamin, and Armin were our other companions. There was a lot of squishing because none of us is short of 6 feet. But the time flew by because we were all enjoying ourselves and the music. We drove around Isla Vista for almost an hour, trying to find a parking spot, but we were unsuccessful. When I say the parking situation is bad, I mean it. We were about to give up until Hunter used his charm to persuade a sorority girl to let us park in her allotted spot. That's how popular Deltopia is. Everyone here laughed their heads off at that. Thus, everything was proceeding as expected. It was Hunter's sister, a junior at UCSB, who graciously offered to let us all crash on her apartment floor. I know that sounds harsh, but in Deltopia, a safe place to sleep is like having a lottery ticket, despite the fact that Deltopia didn't officially begin until the following morning. We chose to spend the evening partying with her and her extremely mellow housemates. Additionally, I must bring up one additional point. A lot of people know Hunter because he is an extremely affable man. One acquaintance of his, Amir, is a bit of a handful. I'm being really generous with the word friend here. When it comes to social circles, Amir is the type of guy who clings without really truly fitting in. He makes every conversation about himself is insecure, loud, and ignorant. He is constantly seeking validation. Also, I've earned the right to speak up about what Amir has done to my friends and me in the past. So please don't accuse me of being a gossip. Not long ago, Amir had informed Hunter that he, too, was planning to visit Deltopia. Who he was going with and where he would be staying were never seriously discussed. On the way down, none of us had mentioned him, and he wasn't included in our plan either. We decided to go on an alcohol run for Hunter's sister and her roommates around an hour. After the crew had settled into her house, there was only a mirror standing on the curb with his hands in his pockets as the 5 of us were walking out of the booze store with our purchases. Silence reigned. We continued on our way to the apartment, and he seemed to have been there the whole time, almost falling into step with us. As soon as we arrived within a few blocks of the business, Amir immediately said, "Why are you all so surprised to see me?" Was this child completely numb? Seeing him took us by surprise, as expected. Nobody had ever intended to spend time with Amir, and no one had even informed him where we were staying, all because Hunter hadn't disclosed this information. We proceeded to stroll without paying him any mind, uncertain of the outcome of the situation. As soon as we returned to the flat, things started to heat up. After Hunter reluctantly gave Amir permission to use our apartment's restroom, he bolted ahead of us. Amir approached Hunter's sister as soon as she answered the door, shouted, "I'm staying here," and then strode past her without waiting for an answer. She must have thought Amir was one of us, even though she had no idea who he was. Horrified, Hunter discovered that Amir had deceived his sister. Here's all the information you need. However, I could go into great depth regarding the first part. Hunter told him it like it was. He had to get out of there because he wasn't welcome and because it was unacceptable to lie to his sister. Amir made a noise as he left. He continued to stand outside the door for another 20 minutes, attempting to persuade them to let him back in. At some point, Amir got the message that Hunter isn't someone to mess with and departed. Following that, we all got drunk, and I'll admit that Amir was the only topic of conversation. It wasn't until later that night that we learned Amir had followed us to the flat. By sharing Hunter's iPhone location with him, I digress. The following day was fantastic. Indeed, Deltopia was as good as advertised. By late afternoon, we had finished up with most of our antics, so we reunited with 5 more friends and ended up back to Hunter's sister's place for some much-needed relaxation. The other guys were informed about the Amir problem by us, and they were as perplexed as we were. According to Rilland, one of our other buddies, he thought he knew where Amir was. He looked it over right away, and his jaw literally dropped. I can't believe it. As he aimed the phone at us, the tiny blue dot appeared almost just above us. However, the moment we brought it up, the dot began to rapidly recede, as if Amir had been observing us from a vehicle and was now speeding away. I found it strange. His second appearance was a sign of borderline insanity. That was particularly true following Hunter's explanation of the reasons he was not welcome there. We should have given it more of our undivided attention, even for Amir. That was really extreme conduct, rather than confronting his strange obsession. We all simply laughed it off and carried on with the celebration. I woke up at random, about midnight or so, that night, after we had all crashed. Just as I was beginning to take everything in, I heard the sound of breaking glass coming from further into the apartment. To see if anyone else was wide awake, I leaped off the floor. Probably because everyone had gotten a good night's rest, nobody was. It didn't take long for me to figure out that nobody else had heard it, and that I was completely helpless in the event that someone had broken in. I quietly crept toward the sound, retrieved an empty wine bottle from the floor, and drew my breath since I was unarmed. My pulse was racing. The sliding door leading to the balcony was in utter disrepair when I stepped into the living room. In the center of the floor, surrounded by sparkling fragments of glass, rested a massive rock. I was already convinced Amir was obviously the mastermind. I walked over to rouse my companions. I was distracted when I caught a glimpse of a closet door handle swaying slightly, even more terrified than I had been moments before. I stood motionless. I didn't believe Amir possessed the bravery to do much more than vandalize property, and the idea that he had gained access to the flat frightened me. I was on the verge of opening the closet door when I was reminded of my better judgment. Rather, I quietly returned to my bedroom, roused Hunter from his slumber, and implored him to accompany me. We made our way to the living room, but the closet door was ajar when we arrived. I frantically scanned my surroundings, but he was nowhere to be found. Hunter retrieved this enormous kitchen knife from the depths of the closet. At that moment, I gazed in disbelief, evidently intending to harm me. Amir had been standing behind the door with a knife. If I had opened the closet door, he could have killed me. I will never forget that terrifying moment. To make sure Amir wasn't in the apartment, Hunter and I roused the rest of the household and conducted a thorough search. Getting the cops involved was the obvious next step, but ultimately, all that happened was that a report was filed. We were informed that property often gets destroyed during Deltopia, and unfortunately, we were one of the many victims. Just so you know, we couldn't even provide the police with Amir's whereabouts because he stopped sharing it with Rylan. The next morning, we were compelled to depart. Leaving his sister and her roommates there was terrifying to Hunter, especially since he knew Amir had gotten in there once before. He retrieved his phone and penned this lengthy message to send to Amir. Before we even got in the car, I won't spill the beans here, but I bet you can guess what was said. There was no delivery of the message, though. It was too late. Amir had blocked him. The group of us retrieved our phones and saw that we, too, had been blacklisted. He remained silent for the following 3 weeks. To all appearances, he had vanished off the map. All of this is still too much for me to comprehend. Amir has no violent past. Despite his frequent hostile persona, actually, I've always considered him to be somewhat reserved. My fear that he will do something extreme persists even as I type this out. After all, he knows where we all reside. In the event that something occurs, I will provide an update. Greetings, I am Arthi. I can still vividly recall approximately 90% of the facts. Even though this happened quite a while ago, April 1996 had come to a close. After completing basic training, I was sent to an airbase in San Angelo, Texas, to work as a communications expert. I really enjoyed my time stationed in Texas. One of my primary motivations for enlisting was to escape my hometown of Mississippi as much as possible. I was 24 years old back then. To people on base, Seabass and Kay were my closest buddies. Back then, the three of us were inseparable, but I've since lost touch with them. During a sunny weekend in early April, Seabass suggested a day trip to Austin to get a change of scenery. We both agreed because the routine of base life was starting to annoy us, Kay included. We loaded up our SUV that afternoon. Kay offered to drive and headed out that very same day. We were on a relatively deserted stretch of highway for almost an hour when Seabass finally got up and started talking. Upon our passing, he inquired as to whether we had noticed the vehicle in our rear coming from the shoulder. As I glanced over my shoulder, I beheld a dark-colored Tahoe or comparable vehicle persistently following after us. Although I didn't witness it leave the shoulder, it wasn't particularly strange since we were on the highway. The SUV continued after Kay shifted lanes for no apparent reason. Moments after that, she repeated the action. Once more, it mimicked her motion. At first, I didn't understand, but as the SUV turned on its lights, everything became clear. Someone in a covert police operation was pulling us over. I observed as the police officer got out of his car after Kay, and I stopped over. I tend to notice things quite a bit. Since I was practically educated to process information quickly, I noticed something was wrong right away. Whoever came out of the building didn't resemble any police officer I'd ever seen. Dressed in full black tactical gear, with no police identification on him. A patch on his arm that said something I couldn't read was the only thing that gave his clothing an official appearance. Neither was his behavior typical of an officer. Standing behind the car, as if waiting for something, he avoided Kay's window. After keeping an eye on him for a little longer, I noticed that he wasn't just standing behind the automobile. He was clearly studying it, as if hoping to get a glimpse of the belongings we had packed. He peered out the back window. In addition to Kay's license plate and bumper stickers, he was studying them. After Seabass and Kay noticed the officer's peculiar conduct, Seabass lowered his window and asked the officer if something was wrong. In lieu of a response, the officer hurriedly approached Kay's window and demanded her registration and license. With reluctance, Kay handed it over to him. For what seemed like an eternity, he retreated to his car. We began to murmur under our breath about how bizarre this encounter was becoming, but we still didn't know how to proceed. The man got out of his car once more after what seemed like an eternity, but this time he was joined by two other males. I calmed down by focusing on my breathing because I could feel my heart rate increasing. The first officer returned to Kay's window and inquired as to whether her father was serving in the military. Kay wanted to know more, while the police officer brought up the bumper sticker that the U.S. military had placed on her vehicle. Just as Seabass and I were about to speak, Kay chuckled and claimed to be the one serving in the military. I sensed a change the second Kay brought up the fact that we were all military. Though he remained silent at first, the man at her window eventually became visibly tense. He looked back at Kay before returning his attention to the other two men, who remained standing close to the SUV's back. An unusual hush fell over the room for an instant. He just informed Kay that she was being let off the hook with a warning, and that she should drive more slowly. He returned Kay's license, and then silently turned around. The three of them hopped back in the car, and the Tahoe accelerated away before Kay had a chance to start the engine. Every one of us was taken aback. If we had been civilians, Seabass insisted, those men would have done something dodgy because they weren't actual police. Since our options were limited, Kay simply resumed her journey on the freeway. The trip in Austin was so enjoyable that we had almost forgotten about it by the time we returned to base. It wasn't until I was reminded of it approximately 1 week later. Seabass and I were watching the local news. In the entertainment room, tragically, a couple had been discovered lifeless in a ditch on a highway near San Angelo, according to the news report that froze me. Investigators think the victims were dumped there the night before after being robbed and murdered. According to the reporter, the following section, however, was what captivated me. Near the site, authorities discovered an abandoned black Tahoe. It had been reported stolen months before, in a different state, according to the police. I immediately sent Sebas to locate Kay, along with the other two. We all felt compelled to inform the authorities of what we had witnessed. We let the police in on every detail, and I must admit that I experienced a pang of remorse for keeping quiet for so long. I can't stop thinking about how that day Kay's bumper sticker might have prevented our deaths. It keeps running through my head how easily we could have ended up in that ditch if we weren't in the military. I've never been one to talk to strangers. Part of the delay in sharing this story's details stems from that. There aren't many things that could be more embarrassing than having this story linked to me in some way. But I was just thinking how terrible it would be to die without spreading it. Thus, I provide it to you. I simply want everyone to understand how much of a leap of faith this is for me. I was traveling alone from West Patterson, NJ to Fort Worth, TX around 10 years ago. I hadn't seen my folks in a long, so I was on my way to see them. This trip was long overdue since I had left Fort Worth years ago and hadn't been back very often. Since I don't really recall where I was, but my car began acting up either in rural Arkansas or on the border of Oklahoma. I fought the need to pull over for a little, but in the end I gave in. Trees, an empty field, and a lengthy stretch of road stretched out before me. I lifted the hood and began to prod around like if I were an expert. Not me. I was merely passing the time. Nonetheless, I was reluctant to acknowledge my relative powerlessness. I thought I'd give it a little more exploration and then contact AAA if it didn't work. I was quite annoyed since I knew they would charge me a pretty penny even though I didn't have AAA. Just a few minutes down the road, though, I could make out the sound of a white pickup truck that didn't seem to belong. For some reason, I recalled thinking that it was missing a front plate. A guy emerged from the driver's side door. I would have to say he was in his mid-30s, maybe a bit older, but with a worn-down appearance that gave the impression of being older than he actually was. His lengthy, uneven beard appeared as though it had not been trimmed for years, and his hair was frizzy, as far as I could tell. He was the type of man who did a lot of physical labor, if that makes sense. He resembled an older me. Same height, same physique, same hair color but slightly less neatly maintained. He came over gently, inspecting my car while he did so. Instead of asking if I needed assistance, he just assumed I did. He appeared to be rather confident as he leaned over the engine even before I uttered a word. He identified himself as a mechanic, and I thanked him for stopping to assist me after explaining what had transpired. I didn't doubt it because of how fast he started working. As I was planning my way back to him for all the help he had given me, he said something that caught me off guard. After he fiddled for a minute or two, he stepped back and shot an unconvincing glance in the direction of the engine. Something about a compression tester being necessary was mumbled by him. As far as anyone could tell, the automobile would not start without it. Then he looked over to his truck and mentioned that another mechanic friend of his might be able to retrieve one, since he appeared sincere. I trusted him even though I had no clue what portion he was referring to. He took out his phone, seemingly to call his friend. As I thanked him once more, he stared at the screen of his phone for a few seconds before deciding it was dead and putting it back in his pocket. In order to make the call, he subsequently requested to use my phone. I was completely unconcerned about it. I didn't think twice about taking my phone out of my pocket and giving it to him. With a single hand, he grasped it. Simultaneously, he retrieved a firearm from his jacket using the other hand. The outcome was crystal clear to me at that very moment. Aside from telling me to sit down and not do anything foolish, he didn't say anything. His voice remained unwavering. It was obvious that he had experience with this, or had given it enough thought to make it look natural. Simply put, I followed his instructions. There was an odd sense of tranquility about the entire situation, as if we were both experiencing something very common. After removing my wallet and bag from the back seat, he proceeded to search my other belongings. and even demanded to see my phone's passcode. After that, he got in his car and drove away. I had just been robbed while driving along the side of the road. I know I sound cool talking about it now, but trust me when I say I was furious when it happened. Even at this moment, I doubt I have ever been so furious. There is, alas, more to this tale, a great deal more. Not to bore you with the details, but someone did pull over and assist me. Not only that, but they were so kind as to start my car and even gave me directions to my parents' house so I could get there without using my phone, despite the difficulties. I had a pleasant visit with my folks in Fort Worth later that night, canceling cards, getting new identification, changing passwords, and generally getting everything back that I had lost happened in a flurry. During the following few weeks, it was a pain and took too much time. I managed to get everything in order and move on with my life after a while. Things began to fall apart after around 6 months had passed. A letter from an unfamiliar bank arrived in my mailbox one day. I received a letter that expressed gratitude for establishing a new line of credit. For a while, I thought it was spam or a criminal scheme. However, a subsequent one arrived. This one came from Best Buy and was associated with a credit card that I had ostensibly used and had accrued over $1,000 on. Each of the charges originated from a different community in Tennessee. I was more confused than anything else at first, but then it hit me. The thief probably had my Social Security card in his wallet when he robbed me. Now he had all the tools. He needed to pass himself off as me, and the following month was a nightmare. Disarray abounds in my credit report, new cards, hard inquiries, and unspent balances. Something seems to pop up every day. Everyone knows how bleak it can feel while dealing with identity theft. In addition to freezing my credit and reporting the incident to the FTC, I also alerted the 3 major credit bureaus to the possibility of fraud. The police asked for my identification and anything else I had, but they were unable to help me because they didn't have a name or license plate. I went ahead and submitted a formal report nevertheless, simply to be safe. In each of the cities where the scam had taken place, I contacted the police, did everything by the book. Yet it still wasn't enough. Things continued to become worse. The identity thief was being very careful with my information. My health insurance company called me a couple of weeks down the road. At a Georgia hospital, someone had gotten emergency treatment under my name. It wasn't simply a payment problem. My file now contained information that did not belong to me. Information that may be used against me in the event that I end up in a hospital setting where I am unable to communicate for myself. The final straw was when I reported everything to the police. After that, I resolved to handle the situation independently. After that, I made a complete change to my way of life and dedicated all of my spare time to finding the person responsible. I have my name and any cities recently associated with the fraud set up using Google Alerts. I was diligent about monitoring my credit record, as well as researching online communities and social media. I took every possible step. On a spur of the moment, I started perusing Craigslist one evening. Cities associated with the fraud, such as those from which payments or correspondence had originated, were my primary focus. I kept staring around till I saw anything. The post was made in Jackson, Tennessee. A number of used power tools along with other random things were advertised in the advertisement. For some reason, it caught my eye, and the more I studied it, the more familiar it looked. As a light bulb went off, several of the items that had been charged to that Best Buy card were exactly as described. For some time, I did nothing. I had no idea what to do. In the end, I replied to the ad by expressing my interest in a few things and checking to see whether they were still for sale. I considered coming up with a clever way to attach a tracker link, but I was afraid of frightening whomever it was. If it were him, he would disappear the moment he sensed suspicion. So, I went with the bare minimum. I was taken aback by how unconcerned the guy appeared to be with me. We corresponded over email for a few days before he finally agreed to meet with me, provided a public location, and instructed me to bring money. The scheduled meeting time was for the next day. I considered making the long journey to Tennessee by myself, but ultimately decided against it. What I would have done to that man if we had met again in person is anybody's guess. Consequently, I decided to contact the Jackson police station to inquire about the status of my case. Yes, they did. I essentially begged them to provide me a hand, almost to the point of praying. I offered them everything I had. Somehow, they assured me that everything was in order to make it worthwhile. They promised to speak with him at least to see if he could provide any information. The man finally admitted to me the following day that he was behind the wheel of a red pickup truck. After some back and forth, while waiting, I informed the police of it. I was contacted after what seemed like an eternity. For the life of me, I swore I wanted to fall to my knees when they informed me what had transpired. The individual bolted from the parking lot the second he saw the police cars approaching the designated meeting place. According to the officer, he made no effort to appear composed. That alone should have sent warning signals, so they pursued him. He eventually lost control of his vehicle and careened into a ditch shortly after. Although the accident was not very serious, it warranted the involvement of law enforcement beyond a simple interrogation. Their account paints a picture of a complete and utter disaster, clearly disturbed, panicked, and babbling in circles. The very mention of the Best Buy products was enough to make him give up. He came clean about not knowing who or what gave him the items. A buddy had given them to him, and he had chosen to resell them on his own. Everything about it was ideal, thanks to the man's betrayal of his friend. The police were able to gather sufficient evidence to apprehend the true criminal. My life has never been more relieved. Just as I mentioned before, I don't want this to be linked to me, therefore going forward, I will be vague. What I will disclose is that there were accomplices to the thief who took money from me. It was discovered that there were actually 3 of them. My experience wasn't unique, and that's the most bizarre aspect. According to what I've heard, they had been going for unsuspecting vehicles and travelers throughout a number of highway corridors, primarily in the southern states. They were all 3 apprehended and incarcerated in due course. What I will say is that justice was served, but I will not say much more than th.